Ahoy there, sailors, and welcome. We are here with the devs working on the new skill, sailing. We're with Mod Husky,
Yeah.
Mod Kieren,
Yo.
and Mod Elena.
Hello.
I'm your host, Mod Light, and I'm going to be grilling the devs for the next hour or so about the hottest topics within sailing. Just to let you guys know, we're entering the final stage of refinement for the new skill. We are very close to lock-in, and now it's time to get the answers to your questions. We'll start off with the biggest topic that we've seen so far with sailing. How do you respond to the concerns that sailing is not actually a skill, but more of an area expansion to the game?
I think I just don't see that they have to be mutually exclusive, right? Expanding the game world and through a new skill as the vehicle to do so just makes sense in a lot of ways. If we were to open up the sea, players are going to need ships. How are they getting ships? Well, presumably want the player to sail them and not just be ferried around by other people. Player is now sailing a ship. Well, that's a skill, right? And it also offers up a lot of, room for progression within the skill, upgrading new things on the ship, slowly unlocking this air access to the sea as opposed to all at once. And I think that it's also surprising because a lot of skills in the past have come with area expansions as well. Hunter came with the Feldip Hills, the Piscatoris Hunter area. I believe Ardoin shipped with thieving, an entire city built just for the thieving skill. Slayer came with the Slayer Cave and the Slayer Tower. Agility also came with Gnome Stronghold and all the agility courses there because, we're not just going to have people start agility without a way to train it, right? So I think that it just makes sense to me that sort of area expansions are coupled with skills in a lot of ways. And I'm going to be honest, we're kind of dialing up to 11 a bit, right? We're the old school team. We're trying to absolutely just nail things, to deliver high quality updates, to go above and beyond for our players. So to me, I've never really understood the criticism of it's an expansion of a skill. It can definitely be both.
I think a lot of it is about the reward space of the skill as well. If you think about existing skills in the game, I don't know, take crafting, for example. You have a very specific reward space. It's a production skill. What you get out of it is crafted goods like dragon leather stuff or pots and vials and that kind of stuff. With sailing, what is the reward? Well, it is access to other areas. So quite naturally, you're going to have that area expansion as part of it.
Yeah, I also think that just the progression system as well adds a lot to it. If we didn't have a skill as the backbone, is it just one ship to sail the seas? That sort of sounds a little boring. If we do have tiers of ships, how are you doing it? Is it sort of just a points unlock system? I think that the idea that you're getting access to more complicated facilities on your ship and then access to bigger ships and then being able to build more facilities on those ships, to me this just is the whole package. And to do only the expansion parts of it is to really sort of just neuter the entire concept and would just really make it a much more flat experience for the players. It would just be more boring in my opinion.
All right, moving on to the next big topic within sailing that we've seen. This kind of links on from the first question, but some players have criticized the core gameplay of sailing to feel a bit like a minigame. What are your responses to that criticism about sailing feeling like a minigame?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is that a minigame and a whole skill is so different in scope. We're very ambitious with what we can do with sailing, and with a minigame, you just don't have that same amount of time and resource going into it. So a minigame would be way smaller, but also the other benefit is that a skill has a very natural sort of form of progression throughout it, which you don't really get in minigames currently. Usually it's just through a currency or something. Or I think Barbasalt kind of does it with leveling up through the different roles in the minigame, but even then, it's nothing compared to the amount of facilities that you can upgrade on the ship, the sheer amount of content that you can unlock gradually at sea.
I also think just the fact that we've needed 4 blogs to go through refinement just shows the complexity of what we're offering. When we're pitching a new Wintertodt or Guardians of the Rift, it's very much a one and done, and the blogs are probably even shorter than the core gameplay blog that we launched with sailing. it really is so much more than just a minigame. And I do wonder if a lot of the ties to calling it back to a minigame are looking at the ways of like player-owned ports works in RuneScape, or even the initial sailing skill that was pitched back in 2015, neither of which are even remotely close to what we're trying to offer our players right now.
Yeah, I think the other thing is how deeply entwined sailing is with the real game world. Like, it ties into all the other skills in a sense. It's on the real world. Minigames are almost always in an instance, kind of just in its own little spot in the world. You're going to be sailing around the actual seas, nearby Catherby Beach, wherever you want to go. It's going to feel like a natural part of RuneScape, not some separate little minigame within RuneScape. If anything, a minigame could, in theory, be part of a skill. It's not the entire skill.
Players voted for a utility skill. Do you think that the line between utility skill and minigame is a bit blurry? Do you think that it's different from a traditional skill, and therefore the assumptions that sailing could feel like a minigame is because it's that utility kind of fits in that box of utility that you can't quite place it?
I think there's a lot to it with that. I mean, we obviously have combat skills that are very straightforward. You deal combat to things. Gathering skills, okay, there's a thing in the world, I'm gathering from it. In production, I'm now turning that thing into something useful. Utility has always just been that miscellaneous category. It can be anything and everything. I think Slayer, rightly so, gets a lot of flack from our players for being sort of mini-gamey with its reward system and sort of shop. I think that agility doesn't really fit into gathering production. It's maybe not much a mini game, but I mean, if you sort of look at it, what are you getting out of that skill? Like, it's literally like, you could almost argue that I should just be able to take those shortcuts anyway, right? Or I should just be able to run more. It sort of fits that, okay, well, agility kind of is just going, like, traversing the world in a kind of different way on land. I don't know. I think there is like a heavy overlap with utility and mini-gamey feeling skills.
They lean into that territory a little bit more, but that was what the community voted for, right? Utility most of all. All right, let's talk about sailing and whether it's integrated with the game world. We've had some criticisms that it could be siloed off from the rest of the game, partly due to concerns from way back in 2015 from the original pitch. So, excluding the sea, what presence does sailing have in the game world as players know it currently?
So I think the big one is just its sort of integration with other skills and how they are going to be used to help you with sailing. Building facilities on your ship is something that is going to be done with a construction skill, so that sort of gives it another use outside of the player-owned house. You'll be using crafting and smithing to turn resources into the materials that you'll then use to build these facilities, so you've got that sort of overlap there. We've already spoken a lot in the blogs about how magic can have cool uses, like I'm going to teleport to my ship or teleport my ship to the port that I'm currently at. The ship in a bottle was kind of a really cool player suggestion, really, that's saying, hey, what if I could use my magic skill to carry my ship around in a single inventory slot? And that opened up a world of sort of integration options where maybe shops are really selling ship in a bottles because, like, you can't, have a store with a ship in a stack of ships in their inventory, right? Or maybe you can steal a ship in a bottle from an NPC while pickpocketing, and that's like oh, cool. Otherwise, how would I have been able to steal a ship from somebody through that? So that's a lot of cool integration things. And then I think just the expansion-like properties of sailing that players have, pointed out and said. I think there's a lot of players hyped about it. There's a lot of people going, oh, is it just an expansion? But just that nature in general is going to inject a lot of cool new resources and items that can then feed back into a variety of other skills. Talking about new herbs for new potions, new ores to smelt into new bars to make new things. And then finally, just the secondary activities that we touched on with sailing. I think very early on, we were very excited to say, okay, what happens if you could do this skill while at sea? And farming is sort of maybe looking at corals, fishing is kind of if it's a new take on trawling, or sort of mining and mineral dredging. I think that just that integration with, you're not just on a boat with points that you've bought with some currency in a shop that then goes out and does things, and come back and get more points, which would be like a very simplified version of it. It's all tying into things. The new fish that you're getting, what are they going to be cooked? Or can they be cooked? If they are cooked, is it just an amount of hit points? Are there some cool new effects? All of this is integrating with things that players can currently do. And I think that is, honestly, just that whole prospect in general is one of the more exciting parts of sailing to me.
100%. I think it's also vital to mention the way that it integrates with the existing game world, like the areas in the game. So obviously, with sailing, you're going to be on the sea, but you've seen a lot of the sea from the land. So now you just get to see familiar sights, but from the other perspective, which I think is really cool. Something we mentioned early on is like, imagine passing by the people fishing in Catherby and you get to like wave hi to them, on your ship. But the other thing is that we want to have a look at the ports in the game, because they're going to be the way that you access the sea. So it's like the access point between the land and the sea. And there will be tons of activities at these ports. Like you'll pick up port tasks here. It's probably a good like trading hub for resources and for maybe stealing ships, right? Repairing ships, upgrading them, managing your crew, all these kind of things. So we want to really lean into the existing ports in the game and maybe even add a couple of new ones as well.
Awesome, thanks Elena. I think it's great that you mentioned ports specifically. And I think there's this level of misconceptions around the fact that you have to go to a port to train the sailing skill. But I think it's important as well that we remind players that that works no differently to other types of skills in the game. Like for example, you have to go to your player-owned house to train construction, or you have to go to a runecraft altar to train runecrafting, even though runecrafting isn't the most favored skill. But it works quite similar to existing skills, right? Like that's the design in principle.
Yeah, I think ports just is a buzzword that just has that negativity to sort of play your own ports that RuneScape's done. So I think the players thinking, oh, you go to a port and that means that it's not attached to the game world. But I completely agree. I think that does mean it is so attached to the game world. Yeah.
So the next topic, travel generally isn't something that players scream and shout about being really, really fun in the game. It's more of an inconvenience to do the kind of content you want to do. Players already have a number of methods of transportation. How do you respond to the criticism that this is just another method of transport for players that they don't necessarily need?
I think that we've never really set out to make sailing a new transportation method across the game. I can understand it, right? It's a vehicle on water. But we do live in a fantasy world where magic is a thing and players zip from A to B. There's no way to compete with that level of transportation. I mean, sure, if you're a level 1 magic pure, maybe sailing offers a unique way to get from one port to another that you couldn't otherwise, and maybe you're not allowed to use teleport jewelry as well on that account and things. But for us, sailing really is just that vehicle to allow you to traverse an area of the world that you otherwise are not able to, and you currently can't do. The only real access to the sea you have currently is through very scripted encounters with certain NPCs, through charter ships, that kind of thing. So I think that we're just not trying to be a method of transportation. And I think that players who are concerned about maybe a meta, say we introduce a cool new boss on an island and players like, oh, I've got a 10, 15-minute voyage to get there. I think that that's something that we would try to heavily consider with that boss and its particular piece of content. We've already mentioned that other skills could bring in things like new gems to make for new jewelry. Maybe once you've visited islands, there's some new jewelry that you can sort of teleport to these hotspots, that kind of thing. So yeah, I hope that kind of clears it up. I've just never really seen it as a transportation method personally.
Cool. How do you guys respond to the criticism that sailing is just fully reliant on other skills and they just funnel into the sailing training method?
Don't really think that's true necessarily. So one thing that we kind of focused on when we talked about core gameplay is that we have different sort of tiers of content essentially and ways of training sailing. And we were quite focused on having sort of the primary methods being purely sailing training methods. So they're not tied to any other skills. They're purely about training sailing. But we realized that, of course, like other skills should be integrated into the skill as well. So we would want to offer alternatives such as, trolling or mineral dredging, and using other skills that way. But you don't need to train other skills at all. Like, our goal is to make you be able to train 1 to 99 without touching any other skills. Like, that should be possible. I wouldn't recommend it. It should still be beneficial for you to have other skills, but if you really want to try, I think that should be possible.
I think as well, like if I'm being completely honest, when we were at the pitch stage and coming up with what is the surface level pitches for all of these 3 skills, a lot of sailing was down to just, oh, what if you could do this cool content but at sea instead? And that might be where a lot of this is coming from. But we saw a lot of player feedback during those early stages where, it just feels like I'm doing other skills at sea, that's what it sounds like. It doesn't feel like I'm actually sailing. And that was something that kind of hit home with the team a lot in feedback, and it was like, players are right. If the sailing skill is to succeed, you need to feel like that you are sailing and not just a fisherman at sea, right? So that was where we come up with all these the sort of terminology for primary gameplay versus secondary gameplay, where we still want to ask the question, how do you fish at sea? How do you mine at sea? And those are covered in the secondary stuff. But as you've mentioned, the primary gameplay, the methods of navigation, those are the things that will hopefully make you feel like you are sailing, and you will be getting a sizable amount of XP for doing those as well. So,
the next thing I want to talk about is the criticism that we can't introduce a new skill when there is work to be done on existing skills. So mining, hunter, they don't have the best reputation. How do you respond to those concerns?
You love this one, don't you?
Oh, I'd love to talk about it. Skills are never done, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Let's say we're in 2040, we've been working on OSRS for another 20 years. There are still going to be the least popular skills. There's still going to be desire for improvements, modernization, adding new rewards, whatever it is. So in that sense, they're never finished, but we are doing both. Like, we have just done stuff for rune crafting. We've done Giant's Foundry for smithing. We've got plans for other skills over the next few years as well. So it's not to say that one comes at the expense of the other. The other thing is, sailing can actually solve some of these problems for other skills as well, because we will see, like, fishing have a use within sailing, or farming have a use, or mining, or whatever it is. We'll be sensible, obviously, about which ones we target, which ones we look to include content with. We've got a whole bunch of islands and points of interest we want to populate with interesting things. Some of those can directly target skills players don't like, right? So I see this as helping with this problem, not causing it to be worse.
I think as well, this all started from a question to the players saying, do you want a new skill? And we had over 80% of players say that they do. And while, as you rightly said, like, no skill is finished, that's not necessarily true for the player, right? There are a lot of players who are finished with a skill, and I don't mean they've maxed, right? I mean, they're done with the skill and they don't enjoy training it anymore, and they're looking for a new source of gameplay. How many players do we see in the 2000s range who just go to PVM because all their skill grinds are getting, a bit boring at the top end? Now, while we can look to help that by introducing things for other skills, we can also look to solve that by introducing new skills, right? Offering a new avenue of content for people to explore and to continue to interact with the game in a way that they love.
I think it's also like a unique feeling of leveling up. And we have how many max players in the game now? Like thousands and thousands of them. I bet some of them miss leveling up. And I think that a new skill can really provide that, honestly.
All right, I do want to talk about Sepulchre at sea, which was something that came up during refinement, potentially because we're working with the dev that led on that project. So there was concern that sailing, the meta way of training sailing would be a high intensity sort of ship race type gameplay. May not appeal to some people may love it. How do you respond to concerns that sailing is literally just agility on water?
So I think that the core gameplay of the skills, just at a starting point, are very different. Agility is very much, I'm going around a circuit, clicking on things in sort of motion. Obviously, Sepulchre kind of breaks that norm a little bit and says, hey, let's do agility with just our strict movement. So I first of all believe that sailing and agility are very different skills just in how they are formed. The sailing being Sepulchre at sea, I kind of get that a little bit because you are sort of doing that more traditional old school movement and navigating. But I think the core thing is that when we were looking at the primary gameplay methods, we wanted to make sure there were plenty of options for other people, for like a lot of people. Whether you are looking for that sort of more click-intensive, sort of leaned-in gameplay, or whether you're just looking for, escape and chill, watch some movies on Netflix, or watch like latest anime that's come out or something, and then just, be doing some sailing on the side. We also made sure with these primary activities that we had multiple that were listed as high, and we even through feedback on the Barracuda trials said, hey, maybe let's just move this back down to medium instead of making it high XP. Now, I think this is, obviously, people see it on both sides. People are going, oh, well, if it's intensive gameplay, it should be high XP. Then other players go, but I don't want to be doing only high, like if it is the highest XP, I'll have to do it and there are no other options. I think that really, when you're looking at a piece of content, it can reward you in a number of different ways. It doesn't just have to be rewarding because of the XP. It can be rewarding through giving you new capabilities to upgrade your ship, which is where we went to with the Barracuda trials. I think when we talked about ship racing, as it was called initially, it sounds like it's going to be intensive from the get-go. And that doesn't necessarily need to be true. With the lore and integration blog, we talk about the Barracudas being a family who are sort of raising people up through teaching them to navigate a ship. So maybe a lot of the early Barracuda trials are not actually all that intense compared to ones at the top end. It doesn't need to be the training method that people go to all the way through the skill, but perhaps there is a course at the top end that is a bit more complex and maybe deserves a little bit more XP. But at that point, players will also gain access to a number of other pieces of sailing content, and who knows where that meta will unfold as to what is the XP. That's kind of the beauty of a new skill launch, to be honest, is we'll have all these calculations as to how quick players will train the skill, and then they'll probably blow us out of the water and find some interactions that we weren't aware of. We're definitely not looking to just say do 1 to 99 through only ship racing, and if that's not your cup of tea at all, we're going to make sure that there are plenty of options available for you.
Viable options, right?
Yeah. I think the word race was probably a mistake on our part to be using. And like, it suggests it's quite competitive. Maybe you were literally lining up with other people and racing. It's not that, right? And I think that caused some confusion. That's muddied the waters of what this is and so on. Kind of what you were saying, I like our skills to have variety. Players like different things. Some people want to two-tick teaks. I'm never doing that in my life, let me tell you. Not a chance. I'm going to go in AFK Redwoods, right? Any day of the week. It's good that our skills have options because that means what you like, you can do that. What somebody else likes, they may be able to do something more to their liking. I think that's a good thing to have, and it's something we should embrace, and I want to add to more of our existing skills even, so.
Thinking of the thematics as well, I quite like the idea of challenging the players to see how good are you really at doing this navigation thing, because we're introducing a whole new way of moving about. So it makes sense to kind of push that to the limit. But that's not to say everything has to be difficult, right? It could be shorter trials or more elaborate ones. Like a design change that we made during development or during refinement was, let's add obstacles that you actually have to interact with and utilize the facilities on your ship to make your way through the trial. So maybe you have to salvage a shipwreck that's in the way and you need to like get rid of that before you can move on. And I think they don't all have to be timed either. Like it can be different challenges depending on the facilities on the ship instead, and we can lean more into that.
I think it's important to emphasize we are still so early in the development process that we do not know what is going to be the meta training method right now. That's really key to get across to players. We wanted to give ballpark XP rates, and inevitably there will probably be a meta at some point, but we don't know that yet. And that's why it's super important to continue on with that feedback loop from players, because it's very obvious that if players aren't happy with what is the meta, we can change that, right?
You're absolutely right. I mean, we're at a point right now where we come up with a very rough design for what these could be. We don't know how this is going to play with sailing tech, once we get hands on it from the engine team. We don't know how this is going to play when we've got our hands on it ourselves and actually playing the content and saying, is it fun? I think fundamentally, I would take a hard stance on, if training sailing from 1 to 99 is just not fun and the most efficient method, is just something that our players don't enjoy doing, we should change that, and we will change that. You know, I think if we do get to launch this skill, and we're probably going to be terrified on launch about like, oh, how are players going to feel about it? Are they going to like it or not? I can imagine that we'd be looking to action a lot of that feedback, you know, and just make sure that sailing is a fun thing for players to train, no matter what kind of player you are.
Absolutely. And I think another point is that if everything is equal XP, then players are just going to do the easiest thing, right? Like we have to have those variations in XP and in rewards, and it has to be a conscious choice, a trade-off, if you will.
Spice is the variety of life, right? You know, you develop 8 pieces of content that are all the same XP and the same rewards and the same intensity, and why didn't you just release one? You know, with sailing, we're not looking to release a skill with only its most basic form of gameplay like some of the other skills might have done. You know, thieving might have only had like stalls and pickpocketing and a few chests and eventually had pyramid plunder and stuff. We're looking to release a more complete package than previous skill launches would have been, but without finishing the skill. That's pretty crucial. We do want to make sure that there is still plenty of space for sailing, just like any other skill, to receive updates in the future.
What happens after sailing is pulled at lock-in? So in a situation where it passes.
Yeah. Party time. we'll be over the moon. Obviously, it's been a lot of effort to get to where we are today, and we love the impact, the input the community's had on the way to this point as well. So obviously we'll be happy, but the next steps will be the real hard work begins. We'll obviously move into sort of development. Initially, there'll be a lot of work we've got to do to kind of understand the structure of the project, how we're going to approach it, and so on. But that's kind of internal. The main thing is the community will stay in touch with us. We'll stay in touch with the community. The feedback's been so valuable so far. Would be, I guess, silly if we stopped using that as a useful way to guide our development. We've already told players we intend to do betas and so on. Almost certainly. We don't want to spoil surprises. That's an important part of the overall launch. But we do have like a desire to get good feedback on certain things. Like, how does it feel to actually navigate on the ship? Like, that's important to get the feeling right. So we might let players try out these sort of mechanics and so on. But obviously it's going to probably be a long period of time as we go through development, but you can expect future polls and other things on parts of the content as well still to come.
I think we can also hope to have like at least like not prototypes, but like early versions of the primary gameplay methods available in betas for players to test. I mean, you could try a Barracuda trial, a couple of simple port tasks. You know, what does charting the sea feel like? Have that plugged in. Look at shipwreck salvaging. And just, you know, we could throw dummy XP values on these and just go, how do the activities feel? That would be really useful beta feedback. I mean, I don't know what we'll actually be able to do, but I would like multiple, like really just nail this sort of player feedback throughout the design process, because I truly believe that the skill proposal has been made infinitely better through this community interaction. So why would we want to stop there? You know, let's keep the ball rolling.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I don't have much to add to that, to be honest.
I think a lot of players will be surprised actually hearing that it hasn't been locked in, because a lot of people that I've talked to on the outskirts of the community are like, wait, sailing isn't locked in yet? So yeah, it's going to be exciting. There's a number of things that we've already promised throughout the refinement blogs that we would discuss post lock-in. So stuff like the Sailing Cape competition and any quests that are affected by sailing and things like that, you know, have yet to be polled and discussed. So.
We even talked about a player-designed island, right? Like, how exciting would that be if people just submitted designs for an island and we worked with that player to actually make something credible happen?
I think that's another important thing that you just reminded me about, the whole post-lock-in process. This is maybe a bit of a look into what does development of sailing look like. Our goal is to include the 4 primary gameplay methods, but everything else is still set to player poll. You know, we'll be running ideas for what types of content could be on islands, what kinds of new resources could be added to the game, what do these resources do. I'm sure that we'll have a whole series of blogs with tons of questions, and I'm sure that players will tell us no to a bunch of them and yes to a bunch others, and have the players really decide what it is that sailing is added to the game. That's super exciting. I mean, on top of the player-designed island, that's really the cherry on top of the cake for me. Like, what crazy cool island ideas could a player come up with?
It's great to hear that the community is going to stay so involved. What about if sailing does not pass lock-in? Do we have any plans on how we would handle that?
I think it entirely depends on how the vote actually goes and the feedback we're getting at the time. So obviously we'll read into that. We'll maybe even do surveys. Depends on how it goes. But we'll look to understand ultimately why players have voted the way they have. Now, if it's close, there might be some obvious reason the players are pointing to. Oh, we didn't like this. We really dislike this bit. We might be able to clarify. We might be able to tweak our design. And in that case, maybe a repoll is an option. However, if not, or it's failed by quite a margin, obviously we'll obviously honour the result. We're not going to force sailing through in that case. Obviously, we will want to still revisit new skills in the future. Likely cases, we'll take a little bit of a break before we go directly into that.
I think the community would really appreciate that as well. I mean, as much as refinement has been really enjoyable for us devs and going through that, I think that we've obviously had a lot of discussion about new skill. I think that break would be good for the community.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little time to just like focus on other things for a bit and then clear up your mind and then come into whatever else we kick off about again with a fresh mindset.
Could we, in theory, release sailing, but not as a skill? So in some other way? And if we did, what would that look like?
I've thought about this a lot because we have seen the feedback. I think we mentioned it already in this segment where could sailing just be an expansion? Because I think that is, in essence, of the same question. And I keep asking myself, well, what would sailing look like if it wasn't a skill? And it would be, well, do I have a ship upgrade system? Well, it's no longer attached to levels. Is it attached to sort of points in a store? At that point, is it becoming very mini-gamey to do that? And then I'm like, well, it's still maybe not a mini-game because of the wealth of content at sea that we have. But then how are you actually gating access to it? It could feel very much like complete level 1 and then get points and then come back with a level 2 ship and do this area of the sea. I also think that without a skill sort of supporting it, I just feel that it becomes very flat and boring. I feel like players would just see this as a very arbitrary set of steps they would need to do to get to content. Whereas I truly believe that actually training a skill, feeling like you are a sailor and getting invested in being better at becoming a sailor, truly enhances the experience of exploring the sea. So yeah, I think that theoretically, I think a lot of the content could sound cool. I think especially players have just said, ooh, I want bosses on islands. And you can just do bosses on islands, Jagged. Just give me a boss on an island. And yeah, we've done that kind of content cycle before. We could do that. I hope that players could just get excited about the fact that we're offering them something more. We have repeatedly said that sailing is not just content on islands. Once you step foot on an island, as far as we're concerned, you're no longer sailing. You are now doing some other piece of traditional content. Sure, that could feed back into sailing. Maybe you find a schematic for a really cool ship upgrade or a material that you were using, that you were sort of required to build a facility. But that content on an island could just not feed back into sailing at all and could feed back into another skill entirely or some other method of player progression. Who knows? So yeah, I guess I just feel that I'm glad that players are excited about the type of content that we're pitching here, even if they might be on the fence about it being a skill. And I would just hope that they can see that this is all better because it's a skill.
100% agree. I feel like progression is like the backbone of old school RuneScape in a way. So many things is just tied to the skill system and leveling up and seeing number go up, right? Like players love that. I love that. The other thing you mentioned as well is like bosses on islands. Sure, we already have that. We have Temporos, skilling boss. We have Zolra, that's a boss on an island. You don't need sailing to go to bosses on islands, but we'd like to. There are so many islands that are just unexplored that even NPCs in the existing world haven't gone to. And so being the first, I just love the idea of being the first one to explore a new place. Like re-exploring Fossil Island, for example. Like the players sailed there. We can make that better, obviously, with sailing and add tons more content like that.
I think the exclusivity, at least on launch, that just naturally comes with a skill is like really hype. I think a lot of players speak to the Slayer launch where, you know, Jagex at the time wasn't very forthcoming with rewards and ideas and stuff, and a lot of players were like, what is that weapon that you're holding? And it was an Abyssal Whip, and the first people to get there to provide Abyssal Whips for the player base. I'm sure that, you know, some of the content that we put out there, there'll be people who, you know, discover the metas, find the optimal ways, they're just that bit ahead of the competition, and they could make a ton of money off selling these rare things off it. And I just think that without it being a skill, it just feels like you're taking extra steps to get there for the sake of it. Whereas the gating of that and having the difference between an account that is 30 sailing versus 60 versus 90 just adds a lot of feeling to that, sort of meaning to that progression.
Great points. I think as a skill, it's just objectively better content for the player. Much deeper integration, much better reward space. There's just all of the elements of refinement.
It's the depth. Like, it's so much more impactful, so much more meaningful if you, as an adventurer, are learning this and getting better at something. Gives us new reward space for so many things. I mean, I think a good example is to look back at when sailing first launched. Many of you might not have been around, right, like in the community when that happened. But players were like, why are you doing Slayer? We can already kill creatures. We can already add new creatures to the game. It's now the most popular skill in game. People love combat, but obviously it's like the way that's influenced how players play the game as a whole, it's positive, and sailing can do similar. Like, I'm excited for the launch of sailing, but I'm even more excited for where Old School's going to be in 2030, and what sailing and expanding to the sea can actually bring to the game in the long run. I think is absolutely incredible, and it could do that far better if it is a skill. So I don't think we would approach it exactly the same way if we didn't have sailing. I don't think we would go down that route of adding all these points of interest in this manner.
Sailing is a real life skill as well. Like it's very much grounded in reality in that sense, and very, I guess, in touch with the whole medieval kind of fantasy world as well, where ships exist. Like, we already see ships in the game. NPCs know how to sail, it's just the player character doesn't know yet. And I'm just thinking with myself, like, if I was placed on the ship, I would have no idea what I was doing. I don't know how to sail. My character doesn't know how to sail yet.
There's the whole status of being a captain of a big ship as well. You know, it was always, they were known by the ship had a name, and you can just imagine players are building up to this specific ship that fits their needs, that, you know, with a crew that they've picked, that they've assigned and optimized different ways, and that's very different to a setup another player has. Like, that level of depth feels like it can only be accomplished as a skill.
Cool. So let's talk about the HiScores and Max Cape. What is the consensus that we decided after community consultation? Are we archiving the HiScores? Is there going to be a grace period for the Max Cape?
All right, so Max Cape, I'll tackle Max Cape first. Players told us they don't want a grace period. That's the response. I think that's the right call, in all honesty. A lot of the fun when a skill comes out is that race to 99, right? Who's going to get 99 first? And whoever does is going to be the only player in the game to be able to wear the Max Cape. I think a grace period just feels a bit clunky, and it's the same vibe when you lose a quest cape. It's obviously a bit longer, but I think it's the right thing to do. And we're not taking the other skill capes away from players, so you can still go get your Slayer cape if you want the perk, or whatever it is that you're looking for.
Cool. I do have the data here. So we had 44,000 community consultation survey responses. 76% of those people said that players should have to re-earn the ability to use the Max Cape. I think that says it all, really, in terms of what the community want.
It was something that we wanted to cover quite early on as well. I remember, like, we asked players this before we even started naming the skills that we were thinking about. We were just like, let's talk about this, let's get that conversation out of the way, so that when it gets to the design of the skill, we can only focus on the design bits and get feedback for that. And so it's been on the kind of like the back burner for a while, but it's nice to clarify it now that, yeah, that's what the community wanted. We're happy to go with that.
Cool. Does anyone want to touch on the HiScores?
I believe we said we were going to archive a bunch of the top players from the overall HiScores. I think there's a lot of sort of prestige in players sort of saying that they got to these positions first. I believe when we put the survey results out, most players said about 100 was how many people we should archive. I'm personally not opposed to going a bit higher to around 250 if players want. To me, this is this is a community decision. This isn't a decision for us. It's what they decide is the best outcome to remember, like how many players should be remembered as the standing of the overall high scores before sailing launched.
Like who got 4.6 billion first is something that probably wants to go down in history as a significant achievement and be remembered, not just lost to time.
And I think that just having that position on the high scores, like an archive section, is just sort of that way of saying we're not going to forget the amount of work, effort, and achievements that these players really put in, And
it's not just like an archive that's like hidden in a dusty binder somewhere for no one to look at, right? It will be very visible. We'll probably call it something epic, like Hall of Fame or something, It should be applauded, absolutely. It's an insane achievement.
And there's some cool things that we can do with the visual icons potentially on the high scores. We kind of explored that with some visual icons to show those players.
Yeah, we never got complete confirmation from the team that look at the high scores, but we were very interested in sort of just having like a symbol of like, this is someone who was archived as part of the top 100 or the top 250 on the actual permanent high scores, so that you can see, oh, this player may be, rank, I don't know, 70 now, but if I click on that icon, oh, I can see that they used to be, rank 50 or something like that, right?
Mod Kieren, is sailing going to be free to play or members only?
At the minute, we believe it's going to be a members only skill. And one of the major reasons we're making that call is because it's just so intertwined with a lot of the members' skills in game. So it feels clunky to try and somehow separate that and add exceptions for free to play.
Tell me, everyone, what are you most excited about when it comes to sailing?
Are you asking about the development of it or the actual like playing of the
What
skill?
should players be most
What should
excited
players
about?
be most excited about?
The people watching on YouTube.
So maybe I'm biased, but my personal favorite is kind of the exploring of the different the new race that we're introducing, for example, like the turtle people and all their stories and quests that come with that. So you'll gain access to that via sailing. You'll get to sail to the Great Conch and meet Flupa and her family.
Flupa, I would die for Flupa.
You'll get to fight the griffins, and yeah, I think that's my favorite.
I think I'm just excited in the same veins for the stories that will come out from this, right? I think the biggest expansion piece of content that we've done prior to this was obviously Zaya and Great Kieren, and it didn't really do a good job of sort of connecting and explaining everything. There was just gameplay and systems and people you can talk to, which isn't quite the same. So while we've obviously got the example of like Flupa and the Great Conch, I see that as like one of many that can be introduced with sailing. We could be looking at exploring stories and lore that have already been dropped in game, like maybe looking more into the mermaids. I believe there's a book in the Legends Guild that mentions a sludge monster at sea, and just these ideas of what stories can we look at? I would be personally for just throwing a bunch of quests out on these islands and stuff, and just sort of having these all be interconnected. That obviously depends if players want quests. I think that's obviously a big part of refinement is, well, not refinement, but development is figuring out what amounts of what types of content players want. But yeah, I really want it to feel like the sea is living and breathing as like a foremost objective of mine with this skill. Obviously, the skill should be really fun to train. I want all the gameplay to be fun, but I don't know. I'm just so excited to drop these like massive web of like everything from lore to Easter eggs to secrets and just really have players have fun exploring. I think that sort of exploration feeling has been lost with our game for so long because players just know the game world in and out. You make a new account, it doesn't matter, you already know to teleport to the other side of the map and do quests that are more lucrative over there. So just the fact that it's going to have players sailing into the unknown and not know if they're going into a dangerous area, not know what they're going to be required like to have for this quest or to do for this quest, or what kind of special abilities these creatures could have and what tools they need to overcome them. So yeah, I'm really hyped about that amount of unknown that comes to sailing.
Can't wait to feel like a noob again. That is genuinely a big part of it for me. It is rare that we can do that. Like, obviously, even the way that we work, right? We blog all our content in super loads of detail. But like, you gotta think of the size of this update. There's gonna be so many things part of it. I can't wait to get a drop from an NPC and think, what the hell does this do? I'm excited by that. Might not be quite as newbie as trying to wear goblin mail, but you know, it's just like a skill. It's the backbone of the entire game, right? Leveling up, your character progression. That's the core RPG thing. And we've never added a new one. So the idea of having so much still, another whole skill at the level from 1 to 99, not understand the meta inside out, like, that's kind of what I'm excited for. Just the prospect of having a new skill and everything that brings.
Players are going to get a level up message, and it's going to be like, you have now unlocked water cannons for your ship. And I'm like, cool.
What is that?
Is that good? Like, I don't know. I'm going to try and build it. And it turns out they're actually not that great. Or turns out they're actually amazing. And it's just that fun, just sort of new, like, experience.
Or maybe it's like not that great until you find the right monster and then it's like amazing. And then you're like, oh my God, I just found the meta for this one very specific cannon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had the absolute honor of working with all of you for the past, it's been forever. It feels like 6 months. And I think the thing that I'm the most excited about is for you to actually get your hands and start developing sailing, because I think it's going to come as a shock to people watching this, but you haven't actually been able to really do a lot of development work, and you're designers, you know, that's what you love to do. So I'm just excited for the whole community, should sailing pass, for you to actually get the opportunity to do that. That's the most exciting part for me.
Let's see if we remember how to do programming.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just ready to cook. Like, just let me
Let
cook.
him cook.
Let me cook, you know?
99 cooking over here.
Awesome. We have obviously worked with a bunch of really talented community content creators from the likes of Gentle Tractor, Screepmonge. We also had artwork from Volkaban and Hootie. And it really feels like this is a community-led project right from the very beginning, when we started with the new polling process, going through community consultation, etc. So I just wanted to ask, what's your experience been like so far with the new skill process and working with so many community creators, such as, you know, the people I just mentioned?
I think it's been amazing. There's something special about working with players of the game in the professional manner like that, because they'll be working on something and then they'll suddenly ask questions about the gameplay or like something around the thing that they're working on in a very how do I say it?
From a player's perspective?
Yeah, from a player perspective, and it just emanates that passion for what they're doing, which is just awesome to see, and that resonates really well with us because we're all really passionate as well, and yeah, it's just really been amazing to see that level of passion from the community, as well as the new Discord, the new skill Discord as well. We've had regular stages call with them, and they've just been so amazing, really active people. I wish that we could respond to like everything you guys say in there. We just don't have the time. We'd be there all day. So
I think as well, like what you've mentioned with how much their game knowledge helps with the feedback that they give, the questions they ask. Like, you really do need that resistance to push back and go, actually I can't explain that very well. So maybe there was a problem, maybe we need to change the design. Or it challenges you to explain it in ways that, to make it more apparent. I mean, we connect very well on the same sort of wavelength, so I'm sure things make sense when we're communicating with each other. We've got this gobbledygook of like ideas and concepts and feelings in our head, and then we try to put them to paper and words, but we're not wordsmiths either. So we're trying to make it make sense and to really get across all the really hype stuff that we want to do. And I think that these creators have been phenomenal for that. A lot of the driving the driving force behind this was looking back at warding. It was like a 40-page design document that we kind of just threw to the players and said, go read. And there were a bunch of players who got very actively involved in that and gave a lot of good feedback on that, which led to a lot of changes. And then a lot of the community didn't realize we'd made those changes based on this feedback. I remember like one of the sticking points that stood out for me constantly was we're polling the skill, and you still see in Reddit, oh, vote no because battle wards are terrible. And they were. And they weren't even in version 3 of the blog, right? And I think that just going to these creators who are fantastic at creating, you know, these pieces of content for players to suggest, from the to digest, wrong word, to digest in really concise ways. The infographics are amazing, the videos are amazing. They get so much information out in a small amount of time. That's something I really struggle with for anybody who knows and watches these. So I've really appreciated that, and I really do think it's helped, you know, just having players who don't feel the need to read fully the design blogs. I remember being blown away at thinking, okay, we put a sailing Q&A out, and it's like, what, 5,000-6,000 views on YouTube? And then the core gameplay video was like 130,000 views in like a week or so. And I'm like, what? So it really does show how much outreach it's had in just helping players understand what it is that we're trying to propose. Because this refinement process has been, you know, quite long. We've had a lot of back and forth. We can't expect every player to stay up to date with every single message that we possibly put out about it. So yeah, they've been so fundamental to this process, and honestly, like, I don't think we could have been luckier. Like, we have such an amazing.
We hit the jackpot.
They're so talented. They're so passionate, and we appreciate them so very much. Because I don't think we could have done this without them.
He's so full of talented people, right? Like, it's. I remember sitting on this sofa in December. Not this sofa, but it was a different set in the same room for the Winter Summit when we first talked about the new skill, and like, as you mentioned with warding and all the past skills, like the biggest takeaway is like bring the players on the journey with us along that way. And I genuinely believe we've done that. Obviously with the wider community, but also in terms of using the community and working with them directly to help describe what the skill is, talk about different elements. And I'm so happy with how it's gone. I think we can apply a lot of the learnings to even other projects, not just skills, that most players don't want to sit and read just a full blog. It's nice to have an infographic, it's nice to have videos and other ways and other means of digesting them. It's been great. I can't emphasize how talented these people are enough, but it's wonderful to get that perspective, even just to our design in general as well. So
I don't know about you guys, but when I first saw some of the videos and the infographic stuff, I got really emotional, like seeing it, because we've obviously been discussing it ourselves around tables, kind of back and forth, but when you actually see something, your content has been brought to life by these people. Yeah, it's something else, really. So
I get the same buzz whenever I see art or concept. I mean, our concept artists have done amazingly with, you know, creating some of these graphics, and you're just talking about stuff, and then it's seeing it come to life, and you're like, oh, so I'm not just, you know, chatting into a microphone for 6 hours a day to people about things that could happen. You're actually seeing it happening, and it is. I totally get it. It's just, I think that's the essence of being a creative person, which we all are. It's just, you know, is making stuff, forming stuff, and having people consume it and hopefully enjoy it, you know?
It really excites me for what sailing can become as well if it's voted in. Like, seeing all this come to life, it's going to be 100% like more powerful than that once we see in-game models and we get to flesh out things even more. So it just excites me a lot, seeing these graphics and everything.
all right, thank you all. Now I just have one question left to ask you before we wrap up today. Why should players vote yes to sailing?
So it's abundantly clear that a lot of the player base want a new skill. But I think above just wanting any old skill, compared to any of the skill proposals that we fully fleshed out, this just ticks all the boxes, and hopefully will produce just such a unique, cool, authentic gaming experience that players truly deserve, in all honesty. I think that I'm just really, like, I don't know, I guess I just vote yes if you like exploration, vote yes if you want to go sail across the seas, vote yes if you're scurvy pilled. You know, I think that there's so much to this that's just, I don't know. I think I'm just going to leave it there. I think I've done so much explaining about the different design points, about all the things that I think are great. I just hope that players see the vision, they see what we're trying to create, what we're trying to offer them. It is the biggest, most ambitious project that we've ever tried to do in a decade, and we're here for it. We're here to not just release it, but to make it the best content we've ever released. And I just hope that we get given that opportunity.
Hope you will too. And I know you'll do a great job.
I'm just so excited for what this could do for old school RuneScape in the long term even. It should be such a healthy addition. It's going to complement the rest of the game really, really well. It is one of the most ambitious, biggest pieces of content we're ever going to put in the game. And I'm all for that. Hell yeah. Let's do the best update old school RuneScape's ever had. And the best thing is we're developing it with the community along the whole journey from this point through to launch. So I can't wait, ultimately.
I just want turtles. That's all I want. Give me turtles.
Floopa!
Floopa!
All right, well, thank you so much, everyone, for answering all of these questions today. I absolutely grilled you guys on the sailing ones. So I hope that people watching at home have got enough information to make a decision when it comes to lock-in. We are just days away, potentially, from lock-in, and we really need your help. So make sure to watch the Summer Summit, which will be coming up soon. And we'll be talking about lots of really interesting stuff, not only sailing. So make sure that you tune in then. Husky, you were about to say something.
No, if this is somehow the first sailing piece of content that you've stumbled upon, go watch all the short videos that Screet Munch made on the Old School RS YouTube channel. They are super concise. If you feel like you want to be informed leading up to the new skill, that's the way to do it. So yeah, just go out there, explore all the things we've put out, and see you guys in a few days at the summit.
Awesome. Yeah, you can catch up with all of the sailing content right here on our YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe, comment down below for the YouTube algorithms. And we'll hopefully see you at the summit potentially. So yeah, I'd like to round off by just saying thank you so much to our wonderful dev team here. Thank you to everyone at home who has been with us throughout refinement. We really, really appreciate your help and your support. And yeah, I absolutely can't wait for the lock-in poll. It's going to be an exciting time, and we'll see you all at the summit.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.